I wanted to do this session today because I have a personal interest in the topic. Thinking about it, I realised that I was brought up on an organic farm, except we didn't know we were organic. We had no idea we were organic. It was one of the smallest farms in Australia. Nothing had changed at that place since ancient Egypt. We ploughed with a horse rather than a donkey, but we had exactly the same classic plough. There were no chemical inputs because Grandpa couldn't afford them if he knew about them. The only manure we used was provided by the horse. The only electrical things at the farm were a few light globes and a wireless. And the last 25 years I've lived in a very different farm where we are relentlessly organic, but it's ideological. You know, it's because we don't think it's the right thing to do. So to be up here with three stalwarts of sustainability in Cameron Neal, Angela Crocombe and Shane Heaton is an opportunity I could not refuse. We're going to talk about the ethics of food, I guess, at a time when about 10 crises seem to be coalescing and making life incredibly difficult. Minor issues like economic collapse, climate change, vast and profound changes in epidemiology, food problems. Until recently, food prices were soaring because of oil costs, etc. Oh, that's right, oil crisis, which is in and of itself an independent, freestanding problem. Everything, of course, crashing and squeezing each other like tectonic plates. And so we've got to rethink all our basic assumptions about everything from financial regulation to governance to how we deal with pandemics like AIDS and how we sort out climate change. And in many ways, it's the same problem. It's just one whopping great big problem with various symptoms. And it might seem that simply discussing food is almost a microscopic element, but of course it isn't. Cameron, how important is food in the scheme of things as the sort of arguments that we will be collectively making? Can they in fact affect in any way the outcomes of the serious problems we face?
Yeah, surely they can. I think what adds up, the daily choices that we make of the things that we consume, food and drink, have massive implications. I mean, I work in Fairtrade, but I'm just broader of sustainability generally. And, you know, buying from, whether it be a local organic farmer or supporting small farmers who are growing coffee in PNG, how we choose and what we choose has big implications for people in terms of ethics and social outcomes, has big impacts in terms of ecology and environment. When people are growing stuff at a kind of small sustainable, like the farm you were talking about that your grandfather had, that's the reality of most small farming around the world, particularly in developing countries. And that's the kind of, if you've been reading about, you know, the food crisis that hit us before the global financial crisis, and a lot of commentators are talking about the importance of the small farmer in terms of saving us and having the food for us to eat in the future. And as a final point on that, I think, you know, the rural development and rural communities in developing countries is where the majority of people live and where the majority of the world's poor are. And what we know facilitates the sustainable development of those communities, that gives families in those areas a future, is agriculture. It's agricultural development.
Shane, organic farmers, it seems to me, fantasise, dream, delude themselves that they're winning the battle. And yet we're surrounded by every form of factory farming. Every appalling procedure is still writ large on the landscape and on the food supplies of the planet. In your view, is there any cause for optimism?
Absolutely. Demand for organic food is growing every year at a rate of about 30%, and that's about as fast as it can grow.
Where's this happening, though?
In Western countries, in the States, in the UK, in Australia. There has been a drop-off in that growth in the last year with the economic downturn, but the growth has been steady for a decade or so now. I'd go further than Cameron in his answer to your question is what we eat important? I'd say it's one of the most important things that we can do to make a difference. The food choices we make contribute about 37% of our greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture and transportation and storage and so on. And food, it's easy to think that it's only a side game, but it's central to who we are and what we do and how we interact with our environment. Your external skin, you may think, is your interaction with the environment, but it's actually a lot smaller than your internal skin. Your outside skin, if you took it off and spread it out, it's about the size of a double bed. Your internal skin, your digestive tract, if you took that out and spread it out, it's about the size of a football field.
This is disgusting information.
The point I'm making is that it's an enormous interface with your environment, and it has an enormous impact on your own well-being, what you choose to put in there, but also it's a huge way that you interact with the world around you.
You could fill this auditorium with your innards, could you?
Almost.
Well, while you do that, let me ask you this, Angela. Hang on, we've got technical problems here. You must be popping. You must be popping.
So, I mean, agriculture is changing, and it needs to change. The enormous challenges of global warming and peak oil, and it's very easy to be overwhelmed and think that there's nothing we can do as individuals, but nothing could be further from the truth. The only thing that's going to save us is our collective actions. That's the only way we're going to get through this. And the food choices you make have dramatic impacts on global warming and our resilience to peak oil. Do you know how involved oil is in food production? Conventional agriculture basically turns oil into food. It takes something between 10 and 1,000 units of energy from fossil fuels to produce 1 unit of energy of food. It's a grossly inefficient system. It's unsustainable. It's not going to survive peak oil. And for those of you who don't know what peak oil is, the problem with oil running out isn't when it runs out. It's when we hit halfway and the supply can no longer keep up with the growth in demand. They're producing, that's why it's called peak of production. We're producing as much as we can't produce any more, and demand keeps going. And when demand keeps growing and supply is dwindling, the price goes through the roof, and everything that's dependent on oil gets extremely expensive, and agriculture is dependent on oil, as are many things that we do.
I was sitting in the Great Library of Alexandria the other day, which is, of course, is being rebuilt on the pretty much the original site, with this fantastic old codger who's the chief librarian, who I'd met in Sydney. And he was deploring the fact that the price of oil had dropped. He wanted it to go over the 200. He said because that was going to force people to change. And the sudden drop down to $20 is not helpful. But I couldn't help remembering what George Monbiot said at a Festival of Ideas some years ago. It never occurred to me, and George made the simple point, Angela Croker, that we wouldn't be able to ship food around the world in the future because it would be unaffordable.
Yeah.
And this was going to force people to start eating locally produced food. So for every bad thing, there's often a good side, isn't there?
Absolutely, and the more we eat locally produced food, the more we have a relationship with our food and are aware of where it came from. And lots of people are now growing their own food, and at least they're growing tomatoes or herbs in a very small way, and I think that gives them a greater attachment to these processes and a greater awareness of what it takes. And yeah, we do need to look at labels and look at where things are coming from, because it's quite terrifying the amount of things that have been shipped all over the world that are readily available in our supermarket.
Patrice is now selling garlic online. That's the latest thing we're trying to grow.
Fantastic.
It's very hard to grow anything after 10 years of drought. But the response from people is fascinating. They really want to know where the food is coming from. They'd like to know the name of the farmer. It's rather like the wine industry was, isn't it, 10 or 20 years ago. But then I worry, and you put my worries to rest, please, Shane, that very often what is described as organic can be a bit dodgy. There's an awful lot of various methods of anointing people as organic farmers, but are they as honest as they should be?
Oh, look, there are suspicions from people, and I think it's usually actually a rationalisation because they don't want to buy it because it's expensive. I think the amount of fraud in the organic sector is very little. I think the certification process is very robust, and there are things that go wrong, but there are processes that put that right. The complete answer to the question is that there's a certification system in Australia. There's about 7 different certification bodies. They audit farms annually. They audit food producers, food processors, manufacturers, wholesalers who are certified organic. So if you want to know what you're getting is definitely organic. 2 things you can do. 1 is buy certified organic, and 2 is make sure that supply chain is as short as possible. Do know who it was grown by. Buy at a farmer's market. Buy from delivery services or retailers where they have a connection with the growers, and then you're closer to where it came from.
Yeah.
Cameron, is there good news with fair trading? Is this winning the fight?
Well, that's a big question. Look, I think a number of ways to answer that in the positive, and I think, like we're seeing in Australia, Australians responding very positively. Australians understand the concept of a fair go, and when you put it to them and you explain to them what fair trade is, then the most common answer I get is, that's fantastic, how do I choose it, where do I buy it? And what that has meant is that over the last 5 years, we've seen growth year on year of at least 50%. It's more likely some years being close to 200. Between 2007 and 2008, it's been 80% growth in people choosing fair trade products. So yes, but at the same time, we're talking about 7.5 million small farmers and workers in the fair trade system globally, of about 400 million that we know are living in rural poverty. So we have a long, long way to go. And what these farmers tell us is, even though 7.5 million that are in, is, look, this is great, we're getting great prices, we're able to begin to tackle poverty in our communities, we need to sell more. So my challenge, and the work that we do here, is to see that 80% growth become 100% growth every year. That we need to expand the market substantially for those who are already in, but we have as many people who are in who want to come in and want to join the fair trade system. So are we winning? Look, I think we're doing a good job, and it looks impressive, but when you kind of put it on the table and go, well, what's the size of the problem we're dealing with here? We've got a long way to go. But I also think what we're seeing is that fair trade does punch above its weight, because I think one of the things with this global industry that we're talking about of food, as it has become, is that a lot of people involved in it would probably do want to do the right thing. But most of the business models we've inherited in our lifetime and how we've been taught have taught us to do stuff in a different way. And what fair trade shows is that, well, look, it is possible to do it. It is possible to do business in a way and to trade in a way that you can make money, as well as, making sure people on planet are being cared for and looked after and are thriving.
I'm sure I'm anticipating a question that will be put to you by members of the audience, but I'm going to ask that question. How do I get it? Where do I get it? And how do I know I'm getting it?
Sure. Fair trade is increasingly available. You can go to every supermarket now and you can pretty much find fair trade products. There's a certification system, there's a fair trade label. If you don't know what it looks like, fairtrade.com.au, and you'll be able to find it there to be able to choose it. It's in supermarket aisles, it's in cafes, you can get it from Corporate Express to have it work. So we have done pretty well at getting it more and more out there. And on our website you can search and it'll tell you where to buy. But it's not as easy as that. I mean, the Fair Trade certification and labelling system exists for agricultural commodity products, sort of the food stuff we're talking about, but it's not the only fair trade. It's a bit like, Shane responding to stuff about organic. A lot of people use the word organic on their product without having a certification system. And a lot of people do use the words fair trade without being part of the certification system. Some of those things are perfectly legitimate and it is ethical trade, and it comes down, as Shane was saying, for you to understand what those supply chains are.
The tragedy is that terms like fair trade, terms like organic, become trivialised or debauched by exploitation. And look at sustainability as a term. And the attack that's been, and the appropriation of it by the enemy.
There's a lot, and that appropriation is called greenwash. There's a lot of greenwash out there of things that are marketed as environmentally friendly or eco or green, and they're not. Going back to what Angela was saying, I think there's enormous changes to come in how we produce and consume food that are exciting. I think there's a renaissance to come. I don't think it's all doom and gloom that, oh my God, the price of oil is going to go up and we're all going to starve, and global warming is going to make agriculture that's hard now even harder.
Look, I work with a radio program that likes to make things gloomier and doomier.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I don't think it is all doom and gloom. I think there's a real renaissance coming in, relocalisation of food, a reconnection of people with where their food comes from, eating more simply. There's a turn away from consumerism and this endless economic growth. It's really a form of cancer, really. Endless growth is
that is unsustainable.
It's not sustainable. Where's the end game there? It's, we treat the environment as though it's income, and it's not. It's capital, and we've been drawing on it and drawing on it and drawing on it and thinking it's never going to run out.
Angela, as well as your better-known books, you've written 12, and I didn't know this, for primary school students, including the following recent titles on environmental issues: pollution, waste disposal and recycling, climate change and water. When I was their age, I was reading Batman comics, but this sounds pretty exciting. Are they interested? Are the kids mopping it up?
Well, I'm not really sure, actually. They go into the educational market. I think... that they are going into the schools, kids are talking about them a lot more, and as far as I know, they're bringing it home to their parents and bringing up these issues to their parents. And there's a lot more schools now that are having their own little market gardens, growing food at the school. So I think that kids are a really great opportunity to put this information out there and to get them to think in a different way. As adults, we've all been ingrained in this current system for so long, it's very hard for us to change our habits. But kids don't have those habits over many, many years. So if we tell them that it's natural for us to grow food at home, to eat organic food and to eat a lot less meat, then they take that for granted. And it's not a big deal to them.
I was distressed the other day to see a survey out of the United States to show that the number of people in America at this moment who don't regard climate change as a major issue has grown. Now, that's America for you, perhaps, and I don't think that would be reflected here. Is it? I mean, I'm wondering, everyone in this room cares about it. Clearly is here because they're concerned about the issue.
Yeah.
But I've got to tell you, I meet people every day, and I've been grinding on about climate change since it was called a greenhouse effect in the 80s, who don't seem to give a stuff, who are still in deep denial, or they've gone, if you like, from as Al Gore warns, from denial to, what does he say? Despair, from denial to despair.
Apathy,
and they're just going out to buy another Hummer.
Yeah, I think a few years ago climate change was the big issue. It was on the front page of the paper, every couple of days. But now the economic crisis has taken over and,
The new excuse for not doing anything.
Yes, exactly.
George Monbiot described 2008 as the year that we saved the banks and let the biosphere collapse.
Say that again. I want to memorise that. So.
The 2008 is the year that we saved the banks but let the biosphere collapse.
Right, okay. Yeah.
We failed to reach agreements on capping carbon.
Would you agree with me that all these calamities that we're confronting or observing, because many of them haven't quite hit us yet, we're not being overwhelmed with tens of millions of cases of AIDS, as in Africa, for example, but that all these issues of epidemiology, food production, the financial collapse, climate change are all the same issue?
In a way, the whole Western industrialised system is built around exploiting natural resources and not nurturing them and using them sustainably.
They're growing vegetables in the White House now. Did you see that? Barack Obama has got a little veggie plot.
I think what we've done is, for whatever reason, and quite perversely, we made markets focus on profits. Now, markets are social creations. But we've treated them as though they're now somehow external to us. But markets do what we tell them to do. We've created them. They're social constructs. And what they were supposed to do was to, allow us to be people and to allow us to, interact with people around us and with our environment. What we're seeing, I think, and what there's an opportunity with You know, I think a lot of people who work probably in our space, but certainly in my space, see that this crisis that we're in is an opportunity to restructure and to refocus and to pay attention to different things, and to actually say, well, look, markets should be not just paying attention to the bottom line and $28 million for the CEO, but it should be paying attention to people and planet, and that markets are going to be ineffective as long as they're not paying attention to the right things. And we cannot continue to grow, we cannot continue to make money from assets that we are running the value down. As you said, the environment isn't income, and people aren't income, it's capital. And if we're going to exploit people and exploit the environment, at some point that comes back and bites you on the bum.
Shane, on our little place, which more and more feels like a beleaguered oasis surrounded by ever-encroaching coal mines, we try to do the right thing. But every other day, one of the neighbours is out spraying, and some spray drifts over, and you scream at them and say you're not allowed to do it. They keep doing it. The coal mines are expanding, sucking the rivers dry. And then, of course, some of the neighbours are starting to talk about planting GM crops, which are going to corrupt our crops. Yeah. Let's talk briefly about GM, a state of play at the moment.
I'll talk briefly on GM and then go to the wider issue that it raises about organics. So GM, genetic modification in agriculture, is a growing menace in Australia. There's a regulatory system that seems to be quite pro-GM and allowing it. There's approvals now for GM canola and GM canola. I believe there may be people in this room that know more about the GM situation than me, but the GM moratoria the canola moratoria has been ended. The only commercial crop that's been grown in Queensland to date is cotton, but the regulatory system seems to be quite happily allowing GM crops to be approved as and when they come along. Food Standards Australia New Zealand is one of the only regulatory bodies in the world that has never turned down an approval for anything.
No, the New South Wales government has never refused to any application to create or extend a coal mine. Not one, not ever. So we're used to this. Yeah.
But raising the point of GM brings me back to the benefits of organics. There's a raft of benefits. It's not just that there are more nutrients or that there are fewer pesticides. It's those things too, but there's no GM. There are fewer food additives. There's fewer antibiotics used. In Australia, there's now antibiotic resistance golden staph infections. You've heard about this? There are more antibiotics fed to farm animals in Australia every year than to people. So, how these antibiotic resistance is developing as a problem, you need to be pointing fingers at the conventional animal farming industry.
Well, don't be too tough. None of our cattle have got hay fever.
There's a lot of antibiotics used. So fewer antibiotics, avoiding pesticides, more nutrients, avoiding GM, more food resilience with peak oil coming, carbon sequestration into the soil, better welfare for farmers and their families who, the pesticide thing has been shown to compromise the health of farmers and their families and their communities. There's higher cancer rates among farm workers, people who live around farms that spray. There's higher autism rates. If a woman is pregnant, living near a farm that's sprayed, there's far higher autism rates in their children. And the nearer they are to the farms, or the higher the spraying, the greater the risk of autism. There's higher Parkinson's risk the more fruit you eat. That was shown in Hawaii. The more fruit you eat because of the pesticides.
When you come on my program more often, you're gloomier and doomier, and I do like that.
The point I'm making, this is the thing about each one of these strands. You can go on a long way and see how far the implications go. And this is the thing about the food we eat is there are so many implications.
It's tied to developing a technological fix to what isn't a technological problem. But all of those things you've said, people are making money from that.
Yeah.
The reason people make money when there's antibiotics sold, they make money when there's pesticides sold. What we're trying to do, I think what we are advocates for up here, is that there should be markets for virtuous products and for good foods, and where people are making money from not using those things. And, you know, we're trying to change that balance where it's not about, you know, more pesticides and more antibiotics and more industrialisation, which is the traditional ways that we've made money. We're actually seeking now to make money from not doing those things.
Well, I don't think the enemy, for lack of a better word, the enemy of organics is the conventional farmer. If you go out and talk to conventional farmers, they are down to earth, salt of the earth, fantastic people that have been on the land for a long time. Their father and their grandfather before them probably were too. They've got an amazing wealth of knowledge. But they are bombarded with information from agribusiness, and it's the only way that they are given that information. It seems a quick and easy fix. But I don't think they're the problem, and I don't think agribusiness is the problem. I really don't. I think the enemy, for lack of a better word again, is the consumers that want to buy cheap food. Yes. The people who are ignorant and apathetic about where their food has come from. Now, I know Forrest Gump said, if anyone says you're ignorant and apathetic, just tell them you don't know and you don't give a shit. But we really do need to care about where our food comes from. And consumers are the problem if they insist on buying cheap carrots or cheap this or cheap that because they don't know or don't care about the implications that has for how that
I'd like people in the audience who bought cheap carrots lately to put up their hands and then leave the auditorium. Angela, GM, and you.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty scared by GM foods, and I'm particularly scared by the big companies that are running them, companies such as Monsanto, that really stifle any sort of debate about them, any sort of negative studies that come out. They hound people who write negative stories about it, scientists who have, you know, done research that suggests that they aren't all that they're cracked up to be. And I find that very scary, you know.
Cameron, are we perhaps sitting here as four Luddites who are closing our minds to the infinite possibilities of conjuring tricks with the double helix?
Look,
can we admit to the possibility that some of it might be good?
I'm sure we could, but as I say, I'm not convinced that that's the problem. Like, I don't see what we're trying to solve. Like, if we're saying there's not enough food, then we should stop paying people not to grow food. If there's not enough food, then we should actually pay people who have the capacity to grow more food more money to grow it, as opposed to Monsanto making a bucket load of cash out of selling GM crops that they can control that mean that they have to be paid every year to grow it on a licence. Like, I just don't. You need to always ask questions about why and who's making money and whose interests are these things. And I don't think that a technological fix to our food problem, it's a fix that we don't need. It's not the fix that we need. We know what the fixes are, and it's supporting small-scale sustainable agriculture and local food systems and local production systems. But no big company is going to make money out of that.
Angela, I don't think the general public begin to understand that agricultural biodiversity is in free fall. They're concerned about biodiversity out there in the world of nature. They know about the threat that climate change, in particular habitat destruction, is doing in terms of biodiversity. But they don't seem to have noticed that the great variety of, yes, carrots, apples, pears,
potatoes.
Well, there's a classic case. That these fruits are disappearing, these fruits and crops. And here's these extraordinarily brave, this is this great venture where there's a huge seed bank that's just been opened up where Santa Claus lives, where they're trying to...
The Doomsday Vault.
The Doomsday Vault, full of almost every imaginable seed on Earth. But meanwhile, in Australia, it's evaporating.
Yeah, it's very sad, and people don't realise. And things like the tomatoes, you know, there's a particular breed of tomato that has a firm, robust skin, so that's perfect for the supermarkets because it takes a long time to get it to market, but you lose out on flavour. and you lose out on all these different heirloom varieties.
Yes, but it does last 6 years.
Exactly. But that's why farmers markets are such a wonderful place to go to, because you do get these different varieties of fruits and vegetables that you don't get exposed to normally.
I think Shane's right. My observations over the years is that finally you've got to blame us. You've got to blame the consumer for the choices we make, because the buck doesn't stop with us, it starts with us. And if we behave differently, there's a knock-on effect. There's almost a domino effect through what's left of the free market system, where people start saying, oh, we better serve that need.
People assume that demand for organics is driven by household income, and it's not actually true. Anyone who works in the organic sector knows that organic consumers come from the full socio-economic spectrum, and the thing that really drives it is awareness, health consciousness, and awareness of food issues, food quality and so on. And there's also life events like a diagnosis with a disease or having a child bring people into organics. I say to people, you know, you often meet people in a health food store who've come there because they or their partner have been diagnosed with cancer. And I say to people who haven't been diagnosed with cancer, what are you waiting for? You know, are you waiting till you get the diagnosis before you're going to take an interest? And actually someone said that to me once. His wife had cancer and he said, I can't believe we waited till this happened before we took an interest in organic food. I can't believe we waited. And that's a powerful message.